Hello dear students, welcome to the lecture series of Object Oriented Programming. In this lecture, we are going to see the default constructors and parameterized constructors. At the end of this lecture, you will be able to use default and parameterized constructors to initialize the values of data members of an object when it is created. Let us see the different types of constructors. There are three different types of constructors in C++. The first one is default constructor, the second one is parameterized constructor, and third one is copy constructor. In this lecture, we are going to focus on default constructors and parameterized constructors. Let us see what is default constructor. A constructor that accepts no parameter is referred as a default constructor. For example, a default constructor for a class A is A scope resolution operator A brackets. Now here this A is this constructor, default constructor for my class A. It is a special member function because it has a same name as a class name. If no such constructor is defined, then compiler supplies a default constructor. The statement in the main function such as AA. Now here A is the object of my class A. It evokes the default constructor of the compiler to create the object A. Now let us see the syntax of a default constructor. As I told you, the default constructor or whether it is a default constructor or parameterized constructor that should be declared in the public section of a class. Here I have a default constructor which will have a same name as a class name with no parameters. Let me show you the example. Now here I have a default constructor as a demo which of a class demo, and here I am assigning the values 10 and 20 to the private data members num1 and num2. So whenever the object of this class demo will be created, at the time of creation the values 10 and 20 will be initialized for the num1 and num2 private data members. Let us see the example. Now here I have a class demo which have a private members as num1 and num2. I have a constructor as a demo, and in that constructor the values 10 and 20 are initialized to num1 and num2 which are my private data members, and I have a display function and that display function will help me to display the values of num1 and num2 which we have initialized in the constructor. Now here I have created in the main function, I have created an object of a demo class. Now when that object obj will be created of a demo class, at that time the default constructor will be called, and the default constructor will assign the value 10 and 20, will initialize the values 10 and 20 to the private data members of an object obj. Okay, so I will get the value of num1 as a 10 and I will get the value as num2 as a 20. So the obj.display statement will display those values on the screen which will demonstrate the use of default constructor. Okay, let us move towards the parameterized constructor. Now if you observe here, I have initialized the values as 10 and 20, but if I want to change those values, I can change the values which has been already initialized to the private data members of an object. And number of times it may happen that there are number of objects for a single class, and for that number of objects we can have the different values for the data members. So in that case we will require a parameterized constructor. So in the parameterized constructor, the constructor that takes the argument is referred as a parameterized constructor. When you define a constructor's body, we have to use the parameters to initialize the objects, and when the constructor has been parameterized, we must pass the initial values as the arguments to the constructor function when an object is declared. As I told you, number of times we often need to initialize the various data members of the different object with the different values when they are created, and so it is possible to pass the argument to the constructor, and when we pass such arguments to the constructor, those constructors are referred as a parameterized constructors. We can pass the arguments in two different ways, by calling the constructor explicitly or by calling the constructor implicitly. If you observe this example, here I have object 1 of class demo, and here I have called the constructor demo, which to which I have passed the parameters as 0 and 100. Now 0 will be assigned the value to num1 and 100 will be assigned value to the num2. This is explicit calling of a constructor, and we can initialize the values to the private data members of an object by calling the constructor explicitly. If you observe the second example, we can write the statement as demo obj1 in bracket 0 comma 100. So it will assign the value 0 to num1 and 100 to num2. Now let us see the syntax. Parameterized constructor is also declared and defined, or only can be declared and can be defined outside the class in the public section, but in the parameterized constructor we will have a parameterized list with the name of that constructor. The name of this constructor will also be same as the class name. Let us see the example. Now here I have a private data members as num1 and num2, and I have a constructor, parameterized constructor, as a demo. Now I have passed two parameters over here, that is x and y, and here I am assigning the value of x to num1 and I am assigning the value of y to num2. So whatever the value I will whatever the value will be passed as an argument in the main function to the object, that value will be initialized to num1 and num2, which are the private data members of a object. Now let us see the example of a parameterized constructor. Here I have a class as a point which has two data members as x and y of a type integer. Now this is my parameterized constructor which have two parameters as a and b. I am assigning the value of a to x and assigning the value of b to y. So this is the definition of my parameterized constructor. I have one more member function here, that is display member function, which will help me to display the value of x and y. Now let us move towards the main function. Here I have a p1 as object and I have passed the arguments as 5, 6. Now here if you observe, here it is my implicit constructor calling. Okay, now here to that object p1, 5, 6 values are passed. These are the arguments. Now whenever that object p1 is created of a class point, at that time the parameterized constructor will be evoked, the parameterized constructor will be called, and the value 5, 6 will be assigned to the data members x and y respectively. So when I will call the function display to display the value of x and y, I will get the value of x and y as a 5, 6, which is a point p1, for example. Okay, so like this parameterized constructor can be useful for us. So I hope you have understood the default constructor, parameterized constructor, how to declare, how to define, and what is the use of default constructor and parameterized constructor. In the next lecture we will see the copy constructor. Thank you. Happy learning.